Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, or whenever you should happen to find this. Welcome to the Quote of Arms podcast, where we talk about our favorite magic tribes and what they mean to us. My guest today is...
Hey, my name is Murphy. I am a writer over at Commander's Herald and co-host of the MTG Action 4 News podcast at cmdtower.com.
Fantastic, and there certainly has been news going around, but none of it too magical right now. But certainly trying to change that and move on to something that's a little bit more upbeat and happy, because we're talking about some awesome tribes today. We're talking about...
Yeah, we're talking about wizards today, which is a near and dear tribe to my heart and my playstyle.
Awesome. We don't just mean the company, though. The company is called Wizards, but the tribe is called Wizards as well. So, we're talking about Wizards, specifically the game of Magic the Gathering. So what can you tell us about what Wizards look like?
Yeah, what wizards look like, that's an interesting question, because there's a couple different ways we could talk about it, right? Like, The aesthetic of wizards is pretty well vetted, or pretty well established in at least the Western, North American, European zeitgeist as like a normal looking person with magical powers. Maybe they wear a robe, maybe they use a tool like a staff or a wand. Maybe they fit into some different archetypes, like the think of like the Gandalf the Grey kind of wizard, or like there are some other different IPs that have different varieties of wizards. I think of like Wizarding School as like a major archetype for a lot of fiction.
And Strixhaven was one that actually did change significantly.
Sorry.
I was just putting in that Strixhaven is a set that somewhat shifted the way that wizards are viewed.
Totally. Strixhaven did a lot to, I think, incorporate and expand the perception of what wizards can be outside of like old gray-haired men, because that's like what a lot of wizards in like imagination of Western audiences are. They're old gray-haired men with staffs and wands, and they go it alone, and they're kind of vigilante-esque. Instead, we got like a fun, upbeat wizard school with like some quirky stuff and a big bad. It felt a lot different.
It's also interesting that you mention old gray-haired men, because at least traditionally, so a male who had the innate spellcasting ability was seen as a wizard, and those are usually seen as old, wise, incredibly powerful. And they're not usually described as being like physically deformed in many ways, outside of having old scraggly hair maybe. But then you think about, well, what is that when applied to a woman?
Totally. Yeah, like that perception really, like, definitely, if you look at the history of like magic in Western religious history, it's pretty fascinating, because a witch was often a designation, for whether they were imbued with their powers from some demonic entity, or whether they were born with innate powers, whatever that means. It was often just used as a way to shoehorn and hurl blame on ultimately vulnerable members of a community, especially in an era. It was still, a lot of scholarship talks about the word enchanted. It was enchanted still. It wasn't disenchanted. There was still mystery and intrigue around every bend and under every stone. And up until the Enlightenment era, and really liberalism of like the 1800s into the 1900s, I use liberalism in like the classical academic sense, not the political sense. That started to push even further this disenchantment that really removed magic in like a folklore, religious power sense from the way we think of it. But ultimately, women were often characterized as like deformed in some way with facial issues. They might have long noses, warts and scratches and scrapes, disheveled hair. And what's interesting is like there's so many racially and religiously bigoted images kind of all wrapped up in that, right? For men, it was often just like, oh, there's a dude and he does magic things, I guess. Even when he was a political adversary or religious adversary to the majority. So.
Absolutely. Although then you think about like Rasputin was seen as like deformed and kind of creepy and crazy. In terms of
totally.
In terms of a historical man who's sort of seen in that depiction that's usually reserved for women.
Yeah, often as women are often shoehorned that way, but that I don't think excludes men from that. If I was a betting man, I'd just say, there's probably something about the way people perceived influence and how it affects the human body. And so once power, whatever power means in a particular pre-Enlightenment community was established, it became, there would be ways of being able to tell, right? Like, how can we tell that somebody's made a deal with a demon? Which, I mean, we can get into this later, but that's not necessarily a wizard. That could be like, a warlock and that kind of thing, depending on how you're classifying everything, right? But witch or a wizard had to have some kind of way of telling people, oh, this is how you know when the baddies come. But then that ultimately does is it just creates weird alienation of people from their communities as a physical appearance, and even like there's some evidence to say that women who were characterized as witches were often they would be there's some evidence that points to the reality that they could have been what's considered neurodiverse in today's world, but because of the way their behavior was understood in this pre-Enlightenment world, the only explanation could be that something's wrong and they've encountered a power and they're what's responsible for failing crops or mysterious deaths of children or something like that. And so the history of religion when we're talking about things like magic and what magic does is fascinating and ultimately really bigoted, which is just the biggest bummer.
So, the other direction, just looking at them as game pieces. So, one of the cool things is that Wizards of the Coast has done a lot of work towards sort of rehabilitating that image. Like I'm looking at Uvilda, Dean of Perfection, and it was very much, so it's a Djinn wizard, but very much supposed to, I believe, it has very smooth looking skin, has different relatively normal facial features, normal from, no significant deformities and such. I think about Jaya as one of my favorites, in terms of reversing that image.
Yeah, absolutely. They've done a lot of work to try and, I think, rehabilitate and change and really expand the scope of what wizard, witch, does, right? And even delineating between game pieces between wizards and then warlocks as a way to kind of categorize like modes of using power, and that probably has something to do with wizards being the umbrella under which D&D sits and that kind of thing. But
Yep. Even before then, though, there were the shaman, which I believe, while they existed before then, came about strongly during Morningtide.
Right, that was when New World Order was the rule of design, and when they were trying to simplify, and it was the great creature type class update, some of the delineations have been muddy, but over time, I think Wizards has really settled into this neat place of understanding, like, at least more consistently, this is what a wizard does, and this isn't what a wizard does. This is what maybe a shaman does, or a warlock does.
And so natural, supernatural, and learned are kind of cool ways to look at it.
Yeah, totally. And the natural sense with shamans interacting with nature, and that's not always clean with wizards themselves. I think of Kadena, Slinking Sorcerer, from C19, was the ace commander of the morph deck. And traditionally, like, I would assume, like, interacting with creatures and how they're entering the battlefield, that feels more like nature magic to me, as opposed to something like Aza Royal Chaser from Zendikar Rising, which was like, it's a 2 mana, like, Izzet colors for a 1/2 flying haste. Tap, and the next instant or sorcery spell you cast this turn costs X less, where X is the number of wizards you control. Kind of utilizing knowledge and community as a way to enhance or make spellcasting more efficient.
That, and I would think that the elemental magics of shaman would be a little bit more permanent than the ephemeral magics usually of the wizards, which is why they fixate on the instants and sorceries.
Yeah, it could be. There's a number of wizards that actually cared about like enchantments and permanence, which is fascinating. But what's interesting is how they care about them, right?
Mm-hmm.
So they're like a nature magic sort of motif might care about the creation and preservation or the ending of life. Seems like what wizards as a tribe care more about is how that thing appearing impacts everything else. So they're not so much fixated on the thing itself as much as what the thing does, everything around it. And I think we got some of this just mechanically with Inala Archmage Ritualist and that whole wizard tribal deck that we got back in, I believe, 2017. When it cared about triggered abilities. Like, triggered abilities seem to be a big thing in WotC's imagination when they're thinking about wizards anymore. Triggered abilities, and then, like, instants and sorceries.
Yeah, things happen, and then they're kind of done. So, thinking about essentially what the design of them looks like. Granted, there are, so Kaldheim kind of changed this a little bit. But what would the average member of the wizard tribe look like? In terms of, like, their stats on a card?
Sure. What's funny is that, like, some of this has changed, right? I think you're right. I think Kaldheim and, honestly, Strixhaven both changed this a little bit. You used to see outliers like Niv Mizzet, where it's like, oh, this thing is a giant dragon, so it has giant dragon stats. It's like a 5/5 with flying, right?
Mm-hmm.
But with Strixhaven, you see cards like Varen, Voice of Duality, that care about instants and sorceries, like things happening and then dissipating, but they care about it in a way that increases their power and toughness. They're manipulating their own physical strength. But on average, the card I think of, I guess the best way I think about it is the card I think of when I think of a wizard is Snapcaster Mage. Right? It's 2 mana, 2/1 with flash, creature, human wizard. When it enters the battlefield, targets instant or sorcery spell in your graveyard gains flashback, where its flashback cost is equal to its mana cost. I have won a number of modern games. This is years ago, like 2017, 2016, when our team at our local LGS was actually testing and trying to make some Pro Tour runs.
Mm-hmm.
None of us did. But the number of times I beat face with a Snapcaster Mage is quite a lot. But Snapcaster Mage is also not he's not a boxer. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Like he's not going into brawl. He's looking to do something tricky. And so low power and toughness with an effect or an ability on the game piece that outsizes its physical strength is kind of what I think of.
And that is that was in no way a dig at Tiago Chan, by the way.
No way in Tiago Chan. Just a design thing. I mean, Snapcaster is probably one of the more busted creatures ever printed in Magic. I mean, it sees play in every format it's legal in, and it's great.
Snapcaster Mage, not a boxer. Tiago Chan, if you are, awesome. If you're listening, please let me know. That'd be awesome. I'd be fangirling like crazy. Oh, man. So, they typically have low power and toughness. They have a lot of enters the battlefield effects. And that's where Dominaria really dialed in. So, Snapcaster Mage is a card that really likes, say, Naban Dina... was it Naban? Or what was his name? The voice suit.
Yeah, Naban, Dean of Iteration from Dominaria. Is that what you're talking about? If a wizard entering the battlefield under your control causes a triggered ability of a permanent you control to trigger, it triggers an additional time, kind of like a wizard Harmonicon.
Yep. Beautiful. Yeah, so there were a lot of similar effects like that. One of the things that I loved about wizards is that there are quite a few of them that bounce things. And Unsummoned Skull likes to bounce things because Unsummoned's my favorite card. Have I said Unsummon enough?
Yeah, they're really playing with object permanence, right? Like they're I think of what's his name? He came out M21 Baron when they remade Baron for M21. ETB, bounce a thing. Let's do it.
Venster was one of their original attempts at messing with different card zones.
Yeah, totally. Bouncing stuff on the stack. And that's honestly something that I love about Wizards, is that Wizards love to play on the stack.
Mm-hmm.
I am a stack-based control player by nature. That's how I enjoy playing the game. Now, I can't play every game that way because that's just not how, the fun of the table matters. Fun is not a zero-sum game, right?
I have an LFG server that has over 300 people in it. There's a player named who goes by Goshan Upkeep. He's a legacy control player, but he also tries to bring that into Commander.
Yeah, and that's kind of my background. Is I was a modern control player. A control combo, kind of like mid-range, grindy, on the stack sort of thing with a combo finish.
Mm-hmm.
Splinter Twin would have been my jam if it hadn't been banned before I was really
breaking hearts
in the thick of playing. Yeah, there's a lot of stack play and a lot of interacting with instants and sorceries, and a lot of flash, which is something that in my keep my islands untapped during your turn little heart, I love being able to interact on every rotation of the table. Like, I want to be able to have something to do, and Wizards really embody that ethos of I always want to have something to do. I'm
Mm-hmm.
gonna be ready.
And then another banning got rid of that, right? uh, I was thinking of the blue-green Prophet of Crufix.
Yes. My first commander deck was the Sultai legend that self mills from Khans of Tarkir,
Sidisi.
the DC Brood Tyrant.
Yep.
But if we're really honest, if I'm really honest, it was just Secret Partners Havagul Lich Prophet of Crufix.
Yep.
Because the games I won, those cards were on the battlefield, and the games I lost, I didn't see them. Right? Like,
Yep.
Prophet of Crufix was busted.
Oh, yeah, it was broken in half.
So let me ask you a question. When you think of wizards, like, mechanically, what does that actually make you think of? Like, what do you feel? What memories does it elicit when you think of wizards as a game piece in Magic the Gathering?
I have a few different ways of looking at them, but for the most part, to me, wizards are complicated Rube Goldberg machines. They're creatures that are very much based in blue, which means that their power isn't obvious. It's something where it takes time, tinkering, patience to draw out their power. But they can exist in any color because of the fact that they are based around knowledge, and knowledge can exist anywhere.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. Like when you look at EDH Rec's breakdown of the Wizards tribe, it shows some color combinations at the top of the page, and when you look right there, it's mono blue. Is it Grixis, which is blue red. Grixis is blue red black, and then 5 color is the other main category of decks, with a significant drop off. Right, like I say significant, like 2205 is it Wizards decks, and the next lowest is 5 color with 94 decks. So there's a significant drop off in the data, but it goes to show like span is immediately pushes out from that blue and blue red color identity to encompass really everything.
Yeah, there's one in particular that uses that. So you write for Commander's Herald too. I'm gonna guess, although it's not necessarily true. Do you know Ben Doolittle?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Because he writes for Commander's Herald as well. And he has an Anala deck that's basically mono blue. He doesn't actually cast Anala, he just uses the Eminence ability. And he uses the Anala Eminence ability to just double up on all these wizard under the battlefield effects. It's mono blue, but he doesn't actually cast the commander.
I love builds like that where there's like a self-imposed restriction outside of like commander. So like one of my good buddies in our local play group here for the longest time had a mono white Marchesa deck. It was the Mardu Marchesa with like the throne, but he just played white cards and would cast her at some point during the game in order to get Monarch. And Monarch was what helped him keep up as an aggro player with a rotation of a bunch of mid-range decks and even control decks. He could keep drawing cards. He was always on the aggressive foot. As long as he didn't get board wiped, he could continue to amass card advantage and push the game down court, which I thought was a pretty cool idea. So I love that. Mono blue and Anala sounds sweet.
Yeah, I love decks that are able to use cards in different ways. Now this is a shaman, but I have a Plarg deck that goes into Glimpse of Tomorrow, because Plarg has the pseudo cascade. Reveal cards from the top until you reveal a non-legendary non-land card with mana value 3 or less. The only hit for it is Glimpse of Tomorrow, so I get to do some nasty stuff with regards to shuffling my permanents and putting cool things out.
That's pretty sweet. I never would have put that together. That's pretty rad.
One of the neat things about it is non-legendary non-land with mana value 3 or less, and put that and cast it without paying its cost. Glimpse would then be free. Shuffle all permanents you own, so it gets all lands, but guess what else makes a ton of permanents and happens to be just beyond that? Well, Plarg, because of its backside, gets white, so Smothering Tithe.
Oh, no.
So I can do a one-sided Warp World.
Yikes. And just like, I'd imagine your board state after resolving that Glimpse has got to be nuts a lot of the time, right?
I have not actually tried the deck, but in theory, yes.
Gotcha.
Granted, it's
kind of still in that theory stage.
Yeah, well, because I haven't been playing a lot recently, because I've been cutting things back in order to. Well, I've had some panic attacks because my work has been really, really stressing me out, and so my regular streaming, I just can't keep that up.
Gotcha. I'm sorry to hear that.
It's okay. I'm getting there. I started seeing a therapist about that, and it's helping. But also getting caught up on my work and sort of having the flexibility to parry it is helpful. And that's a good thing to get out there too.
Yeah, totally. We're recording this on February 25th, 2022. This is one of the most stressful times in recent history, especially for the West, with everything going on internationally. Plus, we're in 2020 part 2 now, or part 3.
Well, we've got
like the pandemic
we got war, we've got anti-LGBTQ legislation in several southern states. No, it's not to say anything bad about the people who live there. It's the leadership involved that's making these decisions that are making life very difficult for people that I care about.
Yeah, for sure.
But thankfully, and this is at least in part because I helped spur it on, but EDHREC is donating, I believe, they're matching donations up to $2,000 for to support the trans community. I think that just came out in the last hour or two.
Yeah, I just saw that. So if you hear this and go to Twitter, there's links on the EDHREC Twitter to be able to get connected with that.
Yep. And I'm going to be donating the whatever pay I get for the next article that I write to that as well. Thankfully, I'm in a position where, because of my jobs, I have a decent amount of security financially, but also anything I can do to help.
Sure.
But yeah, there's awesome transformative abilities with with wizards, and it's been interesting to see how Magic has addressed ideas. So we're talking about spellcasters and different types of spellcasters. To see how Magic's dealt with the concepts of gender identity recently, with Alesha, with Nico. Now, it's not necessarily for us to talk about, but it is wonderful to see that representation.
Yeah, in a game like this that is so broad-reaching and important to so many people, especially in communities that I don't know, Magic is a game that has something for everyone. I think that's part of what made me fall in love with the game. I started playing in like 2000-ish. Part of what made me love the game is that it was a place for everyone. And LGS's, now from like my perspective, understanding intersectionality and all that stuff, my intersection is pretty privileged. Like I'm a white guy in the Midwest, right?
Same.
It's just kind of like the nature of it. And yet it's cool to see a game that really I felt like growing up, this has something for everyone. Embodying that ethos at a level that's meaningful to those communities. I think that's rad.
Yeah, rather than say tokenizing, it really feels like they have meaningful stories that are layered and are part of the story of the worlds that they're talking about. I think especially about Nico taking ownership of their own life.
Yeah, totally. I'm going to be honest. I didn't follow the lore a lot over the last, really since Dominaria ended. I haven't really been super plugged into that. But I heard a lot through the Twitterverse and the Discord verse about that was meaningful. So that was love to see it.
Mm-hmm. So you see wizards in different colors. You see them primarily in, you said, blue, red, Grixis, or just generally 5-color. What do white or green wizards look like?
They don't look like really just white or green. I think that's like the best place to start, is that like white and green are kind of secondary colors that are giving flavor to whatever the main portion of the identity is. So I think of two commanders that I think of off the top of my head are Zur the Enchanter, right?
Mm-hmm.
Zur the Enchanter is a pretty powerful old school commander. Has been reprinted a bunch. 4 mana, 1/4 flyer. When it attacks, you may search your library for an enchantment card with CMC 3 or less and put it onto the battlefield. White there is doing the enchantment matters support for an otherwise Dimir wizard. Like it's a blue based spellcaster kind of class with a white flavor because of what that character cares about. And in the same way, green, I think of Kydel, Chosen of Krufix, which green for her. She's a little unique in that she's just tapping for mana, right? 4 mana, add colorless to your mana pool for each card you've drawn.
Mm-hmm. Well, card draw does start to go into the blue. The add mana, I guess you could say, is going into the green, but it's kind of interesting that it's generic mana.
Right, and I think that's a callback to the design on Krufix from original Theros, where it reserved your mana, but you had to wash it, essentially, as colorless. But yeah, it's caring about a main blue theme in a very green way. So green is pulling the caboose of blue, and so that's kind of how those two colors, I think, interact with the class in general. I know somebody on the internet is going to say I'm wrong, and that's okay. But that's my best read of how that interaction works.
Hey, if someone on the internet says you're wrong, then that means somebody listened. So I'm happy with that.
For sure.
If somebody listened 35 minutes in to find something that you're wrong about, I am happy. Frankly, if somebody listened 5 minutes in and said something I was wrong about, I'd be happy.
Right, totally. You're listening close enough to know I did something wrong. Sounds great. Yeah, the color identity thing is always pulling the caboose historically of blue, but also red. Red is the other color that really cares about instants and sorceries and really cares about being on the stack, I think. For a long time, I thought black was that secondary, but I think it's red. The card that really makes me think of this, other than there being a lot of wizard commanders, is actually Dualcaster Mage. Dualcaster Mage to me is like exactly the blue-red, when I think of wizards, that's what I think of for red wizards. It ETBs and copies an instant or sorcery on the stack, which feels like a very blue ability on his face, but really that's been shifted to red with like reiterate and fork effects over the last 3 decades of this game's life.
In red, it's kind of interesting to think about red in the abstract as a wizard color because wizards are usually forethought, knowledge. Red is usually seen as passion and like the lack of forethought or planning, just acting emotionally. So it's interesting to see those two enemy colors working together. But then again, anybody who's ever had to do a big report the night before can tell you knowledge and passion sort of fit together.
Right. When push comes to shove, I will make sure my knowledge does the work it needs to do, right? And I think that's pressure might be the best way to think about it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's a really interesting kind of metaphor for it. I hadn't really thought of that before.
Honestly, I hadn't until now. But it's interesting to think about it working that way. Otherwise, it does seem a little weird that the color of passion is the color is these premeditated, crazy combinations.
Yeah, because red feels like it would be a little bit more of an elementalist or maybe shamanic sort of vibe.
Mm-hmm.
But and they do. I mean, that's part of what Khans of Tarkir block showed us, with Temur being the home of the kind of elemental tribe,
Mm-hmm.
or elemental matters as much as like shamanic and elementalists.
That's sort of what happens when you start to bring green in. So Temur for me felt more like gruel with a little bit of basically wet gruel. I guess is the way I've sort of heard it described before. Especially because their mechanics cared about the size of creatures.
Yeah, for sure. With Ferocious there, it definitely felt that way. And there wasn't really a blue way of thinking about power and toughness. I feel like with Kaldheim and then Strixhaven, that changed a little bit with what having giants be blue-red and then having Magecraft be across all the colors, but particularly it seems like it cared a lot about power and toughness often. Maybe as an easy templating decision across most of the colors. So.
Mm-hmm. In terms of being able to fit those things together, then you start to go into, say, is it? And is it to me, unlike, so Prismari feels more shamanic to me than, say, is it? Is it to me feels a little bit more wizard-like. Again, going at that that frantic necessity, mother of invention type of motif.
Yeah, I think that's probably true. I think of them as two parts of the same coin. Where if you're talking about like necessity being the mother of invention, that like there's mechanical expression of that, which is very much the Is It Guild vibe, and then there's artistic expression of it, which is very much Prismari. I think it's like the modality feels more shamanic, but like I could see why it being like a primary color identity for wizards makes a lot of sense still with Prismari.
Yeah, I can see, if we're talking about the necessity as the mother of invention and trying to go at Prismari and trying to figure out how do you get necessity as the mother of invention from free expression? I think that might go into maybe some of Black Swan. If you know what I'm talking about with that.
Sure. Yeah, totally.
So where they're trying to achieve this perfect performance. Hence why, again, Uvilda is the Dean of Perfection. As one of the Prismari Deans.
Yeah, totally. It's that iterate until you got it, which is very much what the Is It flavor was in Ravnica, right? Like their iteration was with mechanics, mechanical components, I should say, and Prismari's was with performance. I'm really curious in the future if we go to another plane where we see another representation of the blue-red color identity, where what modality they'll attempt to use for that. Yeah, I hadn't really thought about it before, but the expressiveness of blue red, I think, really the performative nature of wizards often. That's at least something in my mind that I think of as like wizards put on a show.
Mm-hmm.
Whether that show is intentionally a show, or if it's like intentionally just overpowering. Right?
Oh yeah, and they like to win in spectacular fashion when they do. Hence why you don't just beat somebody to death with a 2-1.
Unless you really gotta. Sometimes
Yeah,
you just gotta do what you gotta do, right?
Yeah, sometimes you do. Yeah.
Yeah, like I think of a buddy of mine who writes for EDH Rec, Ultra Budget Brews on Twitter. He's a Prismari, is it aficionado, and the big flourish, like the big finish on like a storm turn, or putting a massive crackle with power on the stack. Like that's the way I think wizards really like to win the game. It's either through some kind of whatever it is. Wizards like to win the game in a clever way. They like to feel like the smartest kids in the room, and
yep.
So putting something on the stack, or going off on a storm turn, or making 10,000 dual caster mages with haste to swing into the red zone, right? Like that feels very wizardy.
Yeah,
it makes me think of. Was that?
I was gonna say it sounds a bit like my. I have a Rem Carolus deck. I wanted to make a burn deck for a long time, but it was hard to find the right commander for it. Like I wanted to make a Boros burn deck, so I could do like Boros Charm You for 4 or something like that. But there wasn't really a way to do it that I liked. Then Rem Carolus came along and adds to the burn, which is cool. But what if you tried to see just how much damage you can do with one lightning bolt? So all the damage magnifiers and doublers, all the copying, so copy spells and such. I'm gonna see how much damage I can do with a lightning bolt.
I have lost to a lightning bolt a number of times, but one of the most resonant times was with a 1,000-Year Storm on the battlefield. And like lightning bolt, buyback lightning bolt when the storm count's already like 5 or 7 or something, feels brutal.
Oh, that isn't the wizardiest card of all the all wizardom.
Right, totally.
Mana Geyser.
So that, you remember the cards from Dominaria, Wizard's Lightning and Wizard's Retort? Yeah, so like one was lightning bolt with you if you had a wizard, the other was counterspell if you had a wizard out. That really feels like the duality of wizards is like I'm going to just set you on fire.
Yeah.
And this is going to be over, or I'm going to stop you from doing something that will be inconvenient for me.
And then
those are the two modalities of wizards.
And then in D&D, there's actually an archetype that's called the Blade Singer, which is they cast spells on themselves, and then they go into melee combat after they've like set themselves up. So mage armor to increase their armor class so they can't get hit as easily. Maybe they'll use expeditious retreat so that they can move into battle faster. Which sounds really weird, but expeditious retreat just increases your move speed for the turn. So
sure.
It does. It was supposed to be used to go away. It doesn't have to be, though. You can use it to rush in there, do an attack, and then use your regular move to leave. So just cool things like that. So I have a Rael deck that's kind of designed on that, because I love Rael because her anything where the power or toughness or really any part of it is boundless is going to appeal to me. Combo player, I love when there's no limits on it because that means that there's a challenge for me to see how big I can make it. So that deck is Rael and her Drakes, because all of the creatures in the deck have power equal to the number of instants and sorceries in the graveyard, like Crackling Drake. And then I make them unblockable and swing in.
Oh, that's dope.
Yep. So I have
a little bit of like a combo focus or a combat focused spell slinger sort of vibe.
Yeah. Although it still plays the game normally. It has counter spells, removal spells, mass removal spells, ramp, everything that a normal deck does. But it does them with instants and sorceries so that I can drop Rael, give her unblockable, and just take someone out. That's kind of the way the deck was designed. I have another deck that's kind of similar. It's my Morrow tribal deck. All the creatures are Morrows, meaning that the power and toughness is equal to the number of cards in your hand.
Yeah, so you just like stack cards in your hand and try to swing for the fences when the opportunity arises.
Yep. And using bounce and mass bounce and stuff like that to keep the rest of the table off balance.
Sure. That's rad.
Yeah, and then there's a lot of mass card. So a lot of when it draws cards, it draws a lot of cards. So I'll do something like Blue Sun Zenith for 8 when there's no blocks.
I love that. And
turn it into a pump spell.
One of my favorite stories. I'll share this story real quick because I think you'll get a kick out of this.
Absolutely.
I had a Predator Captain deck. He's the early secondary commander from the Anya decks that, like, you sack a creature, you draw cards equal to its power, and you lose life equal to its toughness, right? And then he gets buffed equal to the amount of life you've lost this turn.
Oh, yeah.
That deck uses Ad Nauseam as a hatred effect. So you can swing with Greven. It has menace, so it's hard to block anyway. But I remember Buddy was just like, yeah, no blocks. I'll take, I think it was like swinging him for 6 or something, so it wasn't going to be lethal or anything. I put an Ad Nauseam on the stack, and you would have thought everybody at the table just, like, witnessed a murder. Like, it was insane, because, like, Greven did, like, 35 damage or something on that turn. I lost that game. But I did the thing. Thing I built the deck for, which was to shotgun somebody with an Ad Nauseam. The same kind of vibe, just like surprise and reutilize cards in a different way than what they were designed to be used for.
Oh, yeah, that's always cool. Sometimes you end up taking inspiration from something that you've seen somewhere before. One of the so maybe you might build a deck around so that they make something similar or something that's able to use Snapcaster Mage really well. Maybe you rebuild that deck that used him, or maybe you've seen a deck somewhere that you really liked, and you want to try to recapture that feeling. One of the ways that I did that was with Umori, actually. I was trying to make decks in every color combination. And I was kind of stuck on Golgari because everything in Golgari seems to be the same. It's kind of the same problem I had with Sultai, where, okay, it's good stuff that goes in the grave and then it does stuff. So, it's always involving creatures, and it's like, okay, well, that's not fun for me. So what I wound up building was Umori Seasons Past.
Cool.
Seasons Past is a green sorcery for 6 that lets you return any number of cards with different mana values from your grave to your hand, and then it puts itself on the bottom of your library. Well, the loop comes when you use a tutor to find it. And then you cast it, return the tutor to your hand, it puts itself on bottom, which means every couple of turns you're doing it the same way. Or if you're able to generate enough mana, you can wind up doing other things too, and just accumulating a ton of value. So what I chose to do was have Umori as the commander, but rather than being the companion, where it can only name, I think, creature or enchantment, I made it the commander so I could name sorcery. So I'm saving 2 mana each time I go through.
Yeah, that's rad. That feels a lot like the deck from Shadows over Innistrad block, like the Golgari Rock deck that had the top end Singleton Emrakul, right? Like it was just a Seasons Past loop deck with Seasons Past and the tutor that was like a demonic tutor and dark ritual stapled together.
That was where I got the idea for the deck from.
That's rad.
I wanted to make Golgari Spellslinger because Spellslinger is my favorite kind to play. So wizards are up my alley too.
Yeah, for sure, and I think that's why wizards just resonate with me so deeply too. Is I love that. I love being a spellslinger. I love having something to do. I love being able to react and interact and think through what needs to happen. For like the question I'm consistently asking on really every turn of the game, including my opponent's turns, is how do I lose this game? And that feels like a very wizard-centric kind of question. Like, what do I need to do right now? What can I manipulate? What can I change? What can I interact with in order to mitigate the possibility of my losing the game? Which ultimately I think is very much the ethos of like wizards want to win. They want to win, and I know like everybody wants to win, like at some level, right? Like a wizard doesn't enter a competition they don't intend to win. If that makes sense. Like that's kind of the old aesthetic of the design of like wizards and different IPs is like I don't do things I only do things I know I'm going to win at.
I do also like the idea, though, of a wizard arrives precisely when they intend to. So.
Right, and that's that same kind of vibe, right? Like, do what I want, and I do it exactly how I intend to. Now, whether that's actually true or it's just like, this is what I have to tell people to keep up appearances, I don't know.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, wizards are a very complicated tribe. They do, they win precisely when they intend to, and they win in some incredible fashions. All right, well, thank you very much for coming on. It's been wonderful to have you. Where can people find you?
Yeah, it's been great to be on as well. I appreciate you having me on. You all can find me on Twitter at MurphisAlvy MTG. You can find my articles at commandersherald.com. And you can always find me and my other co-hosts at cmdtower.com, and particularly on the podcast MTV Action 4 News.
All right, well, thank you very much, and I hope you have a wonderful day.